your spouse, you also married into their family. So in laws can be a real blessing, but they're not always. So, how do we make the best of that relationship? Do we need to set boundaries or give grace? Well, we get a lot of questions about this topic. So, today we're talking all about in law issues. So, Dr. Kim, is it common for couples to struggle to deal with each other's family of origin?
I think so. I think
Hmm.
probably if you lined up 100 couples, there would be more that said yes than others. And I think for a lot of reasons, none of us grew up in the same home. So there's going to be differences there. And, I think if you grew up in a home that you thought was pretty good, then you kind of think this is the way it should be. And
Hmm.
so you marry somebody and it's different, then you've got to deal with that. And so there are differences. Parents are different. But when you're married, you've got to figure out how to be, it needs to be separate from your family of origin. That doesn't mean you leave them out in the cold, but it does mean that it can't be enmeshed. It needs to be healthy. It's figuring out how to be still connected, be independent, because there's some in-laws can be more controlling than others.
Hmm.
Some are laid back. I think in our situation, mine were very laid back. In fact, I remember getting back from a honeymoon and like, do they even know we're here? It's like they were trying to give us space
Yeah.
and not be intrusive. And so we kind of worked out a deal that really worked well for us. On the other hand, I think if we'd lived where Nancy's parents were, because I saw it with her sisters, they would have been more intrusive. Love them, but they were more intrusive
Mm-hmm.
and didn't really understand boundaries, and certainly probably would have honored the boundaries we set, but they would never have initiated something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's just because the differences and just because of personality types,
Mm-hmm.
you've got to have to figure out. I mean, I think you've got to figure out, how do I deal with these people? They did give me my husband or my wife,
Mm-hmm.
so there's got to be something good in them. So
Mm-hmm.
let's see
Yeah.
if we can figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I know when when we got married, I had what I thought was a really wonderful upbringing with my family. So I just kind of thought I've mentioned this before on podcasts, but I kind of thought, well, just absorb right into it because he'll love this too, right? And he was going, I mean, yeah, they're great, but like I married you, like it's not like we
Right.
all wanted to necessarily be together all the time. So
Yeah.
some learning curve there for sure.
And I think that hits everybody at
Yeah.
some point. And
Yeah.
unless I've had a few people that really grew up together, parents were
Mm.
friends, and so they understood the culture. They kind of worked through things
Mhm.
like that, but that's so rare.
Mhm.
It's kind of nice when it happens because it kind of takes some of those problems off the table. But most of us have it sometimes realized, how do we make this work?
Mhm. So, what are some of the common pain points that people have with their in-laws?
I think control, in-laws
Mhm.
trying to control your marriage, still treating maybe both of you like you're not adults,
Mm.
like they're still kind of parent and you guys are child. I mean, you're married and all that kind of stuff, but we're older and wiser, and so you're going to come under us. I think that control.
Mhm.
I think when continue to support their adult child, like financially,
Mm.
that can
Mhm.
cause some problems. I've seen situations where maybe the dad and the daughter, and he continued to give her money like he had
Mhm.
when she was living under his roof. And the husband feels like, you're not even allowing me a chance to lead. You're not
Mhm.
allowing me a chance to be the husband that God wants me to be. And so I've had situations like that where they've gone and they said, can't do this anymore. Can't give
Mhm.
money to her anymore. That's just, and being on the same page of that. So, and I think that not seeing a couple as independent. Uh, and then I think manipulation. Uh, yeah, we have Sunday dinner every Sunday night and we
Mhm.
expect you to be there. But if you don't, that's okay. Sunday comes, well, we're going to stay home tonight. Oh, well, grandma's going to be here and she hasn't been
Mm.
feeling well. I don't know how many more of these she's going to make.
Oh.
And then all of a sudden the manipulation starts. And
Mhm.
then you go and you feel bad for not going. And then on the way home, you think, that makes me so
Mhm.
mad, doing things like that. So I think those are some of the things where I see, and it's just really a boundary issue in a lot of ways, and
Mhm.
someone not seeing the new husband and wife as a separate entity. Yes,
Mhm.
they're part of the big family, but they've got to have their own family. They can't be just enmeshed with the family of origin or family of
Mhm.
origins.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are some of the scenarios that'll bring those issues out? I love the example you gave of the family dinner or of like the secret allowance kind of thing. But what else? What else would spark some of this stuff?
I think sometimes when we break traditions,
Hmm.
it makes a big deal. I tell couples that are, and usually go over it in premarital counseling. If you guys like holidays, if you've got set traditions in your
Hmm.
family and you know that his family and your family both celebrate this at the same time,
Hmm.
and they always have, you need to talk to them about it. We're going to have
Hmm.
to start alternating, and you need to talk about it in August or June or July,
Yeah.
not at Thanksgiving dinner of what we're going
Hmm.
to do for Christmas.
Mm.
Give people more time to work through that.
Hmm.
So I think I see that a lot. You can't. We've always had Christmas Eve dinner at 7 o'clock right
Hmm.
after we went to communion or whatever. You
Hmm.
can't break that, and sometimes you do.
Hmm.
Sometimes that you have to because things have got to be different, and you've got two sets of in-laws, families to deal with now.
Hmm.
Um, I think raising kids, sometimes the in-laws think that because they raised their kids, that they know about raising everybody's kids, but they don't have your kids. They're
Hmm.
grandparents to them, but they're not living with them. And so I think butting in, telling you what you're doing wrong with kids when it's not initiated. I think there's times with our adult kids and their kids that they'll come and say, "Hey, what did y'all do in this situation, or what did you think?" And so, if they come and ask our advice, we'll give it to them. But we also
Hmm.
make sure that they know if you don't take it, it's okay.
Hmm.
We're just a resource for you. It's not
Hmm.
like if we say this, we better see you follow through with it. And I think that happens sometimes
Hmm.
where they do that. And then I think money and how it's spent. I think that can cause some problems. But well, you all didn't do this, and you bought that, or whatever. Just in-laws sticking their nose where they don't need to stick it. Try
Hmm.
not to just be blunt about it. I mean, it,
Hmm.
it really is. Those are their decisions. And what Nancy and I had to realize, and we realized it pretty quickly, because I think my parents taught us that you need to give your adult children room to fail. The
Hmm.
things that Nancy and I learned the most in all areas, finances, everything, when we failed. And
Hmm.
so if we're still trying to protect them, that's just not healthy. We've got to let
Yeah.
them learn and grow. And so they buy a house they can't really afford, and they can't do anything outside of the home for 5 years because they've extended themselves too far. Well, they'll learn from it, and they'll
Hmm.
they'll let God help them work some things out. So anyway, those are some of the ones that I see are pretty consistent that seem to happen. You see anything
Hmm.
different?
Those all sound pretty familiar. I think of when you're talking about giving a room to fail. I think I've seen sometimes where it's like the in-laws, oh, we don't want you living in that kind of house. That's no, we don't want our child there. We're gonna make sure you have a nicer place to be. We're gonna give you this gift or blessing to make sure you have a nicer home. But then the blessing comes with some strings attached that are
Yeah,
not spoken, that are not articulated, or, then there's this sort of feeling that, well, we helped you. So now we can have some ownership here too, which is messy. I've seen that a lot of times. Um,
yeah,
or that kind of rescuing, like, oh no, you've got too much credit card debt. We don't want your spouse to find out about that. So I'll take care of that for you, sweetie, from the parent to the child, the adult married child. And just I've seen that. It makes me very uncomfortable even from afar, because it's just that sort of enmeshed dependent relationship. And I have not seen it go well. But then also communication. I've seen some and we all deal with this in our own marriages, but then with the in-laws it can take another level of like, oh, will you address this with your parents? No, you can handle that with them. Like, what?
hmm.
I don't want to talk to your parents about that thing. That's awkward. So a lot of different ways that each of those things can go awry.
Yeah,
But yeah.
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. And I think a lot of times, unless you've got some real domineering parents, you probably don't see that when you're dating.
Mhm.
Maybe you'll see some of it come out, and I guess how close you are, how much you're around them. But
Mhm.
sometimes I think where it really comes out, or you think, well, yeah, we're not married yet. So when we get married, they'll back off. And
Mhm.
so, but they don't always. And so sometimes you don't even know that they could be that way until you are into marriage. And then you got to,
Mhm.
again, it's something as a couple you have to address together.
Mhm. Yeah. And this, I mean, in some smaller ways, like I dealt with a lot when I was early in marriage, wanting to, I would call my mom all the time, call her every day and tell her all these
Yeah,
things. And so after a while, I started realizing, oh, I can't tell her when we've had an argument because she's going to take my side. She's going to tell me I'm right. She's going
absolutely.
to tell you that's not necessarily even true, but it's also not helpful. And so just learning like, okay, we have to deal with all these things together as a couple instead of
Yes.
running back to mom every time, and
Yeah,
it was really just honestly, it was a habit I had when I was single.
sure.
And I thought it was just fine. And it was serving no problems until I started to realize, wait a minute, this is like, it's a new season. I'm married now, so we have to prioritize that relationship first. And I think that's when I first started to really understand what it would mean to leave and cleave, as the Bible says. Like,
That's so
because
good.
I'd already moved out. I hadn't lived with my parents for a few years already. So it wasn't leaving in that sense, but leaving in terms of that being my primary, relationship in the
That's really
world.
well said, because I think we do. We have to leave the single life behind, whatever that
Mhm.
means for us,
Right.
whether it's, you know, and embrace the marriage relationship. So when you would talk to your mom, you'd go to Brian and tell him he's wrong because my mom said so. He didn't like that.
Well, of course, I'd already told him he was wrong. He should have known. But yeah, and then it's like realizing what's that going to do to their relationship? Like they have a really beautiful relationship. But at first it was like it was not set up for success because I'm going, well, yeah, that's right. She's going to take my side. And he's like, what?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, it just, and plus, you recover from it. You were upset at Brian, and you talked to your mom about it. You and
Hmm.
Brian work it out. Well, she's still mad because he did
Yeah.
that to my daughter, and
Right.
so I don't think that's you go to a Christian counselor, have a good mentor, or have a good friend that you trust to talk about those
Yes.
things with.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's very good. Or even better, just start working it out together one on
Yeah.
one.
Yes.
Because eventually you'll have to get there. So, okay, this is a tough question, but how can a couple know if they should set a boundary on something versus if they need to just give grace for a difference of opinion or just different preferences?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I really would say the first thing as a couple is to pray about it, to
Mm-hmm.
really ask God's wisdom into that, and then to kind of talk it through and get on the same page. And once you're on the same page, then I think it gives you what your next step is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is something that's important. We've talked to them about it. It's never worked. You both agree on it. So we're going to
Mm-hmm.
set this boundary and we're
Mm-hmm.
going to let them know what that boundary is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think that's really important to begin to take that step. And then if it's something that it's just involves, just accepting maybe where they are, or
Mm-hmm.
they are have a different opinion, and that that's okay. We
Mm-hmm.
don't agree with it, and I think, the last couple of years, I've had so many families that have been split because of political differences and things
Oh
like
man.
that, probably in a way that's in my lifetime I've never seen before. And so most of the time, it's going to be, if that's a situation, it's going to be an opinion
Mm-hmm.
difference. Sometimes I think it's blown out of proportion, but there's not really boundary there. Well, I guess there could be if
Mm-hmm.
all they're doing is trying to make you believe the way they believe or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. So, but I think that's kind of the process I would go through. Pray, get on the same page, and in that, I think how does this affecting us in our marriage? I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
really good question to ask. If they're just nuts and they're not really affecting you, that's probably not the best word to use. But then let them live their life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it's coming in and they're nuts in your place in your relationship, then you got to deal something about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just because you see an in-law do something that bugs you doesn't mean that you're the policeman and that you're the one who has to set the boundaries or come down
Mm-hmm.
on or something like that.
Yeah. So would you say, okay, so I like that use the political division kind of example because I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah.
Has do you think it's helpful at times, like say it's you have family dinner for every holiday, and at every holiday there's some kind of big argument. Do you think there's a way to say, hey, can we all agree to set this boundary that we're not going to talk about politics?
Yes.
Those kind of things. Have you seen that work?
Yeah, I think you've got to be, but I think sometimes people test that, so I think you have to know
Mm-hmm.
what the consequences are. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna ask you to leave, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
because we're not gonna let that disrupt our family dinner together. I
Mm-hmm.
had a family, and this was really good. They had it was Christmas, and they had an uncle that always came, and he always came drinking,
Mm-hmm.
and he would get louder, and even though they, I think, had used to serve wine with dinner on Christmas Eve. They quit doing that. They were willing to do whatever it took to get
Mm-hmm.
that out of the way. Well, of
Mm-hmm.
course, he brings his flask and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the husband told him probably that fall sometime, we're going to do Christmas at our Eve at our house again. We want you to be there. If you're drinking,
Mm-hmm.
come to the door drunk. I'm going to turn you away.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, sure, sure, all that kind of stuff. Well, Christmas Eve, he came drunk, and the husband
Mm-hmm.
said, you can't come in. I'm sorry,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't come in,
Mm-hmm.
and closed the door and locked it. That's hard,
Oh man.
but they had to. I think they had to do that. I'm not. I didn't really get to follow up with them after that. I don't know what happened the
Mm-hmm.
next year. I'm hoping that sent a message to Uncle and that he was able to get whatever help he needed. But
Yeah.
I think there's some tough things that come with that sometimes you have to follow through with. And so,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's not talking about politics, it's kind of uh, someone that behavior goes that, whether it's drinking or whatever that is,
Mm-hmm.
that gets out of control. Those kind of things that are tough.
Yeah, and that's a great example too because it's a really clear boundary and it's enforceable. So
Yes.
it was something that they had the ability to enforce that, and that's
Yeah.
really important in that situation.
It was, and it wasn't the easiest thing for him to
Mm-mm.
stand at the door and tell his uncle that he loved, "You can't come in."
Mhm.
But he knew he was able to see the big picture
Mhm.
because he could have said, "Well, we'll try it one more Christmas Eve your
Right.
way." No,
Mhm.
because that's not gonna do any good. You can't.
Mhm.
I think that's another important to say. You can't set a boundary that you don't follow through with.
Yeah.
Then the people will just kinda learn to discount it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point too. Even just the thought of communicating ahead of time. I like that being that specific about it, that you're thinking ahead. You're not just kind of going, "Oh no, here we go. It's going to happen again. Oh, this is the
Right.
worst," kind of complaining or whatever, but it's actually taking some action. And I can think of some times where if I had been aware of that, I would have, like if you're having a kid's birthday dinner, you don't want to be talking about like politics at the kid's birthday dinner. That doesn't feel
Right.
good for the kid. They remember
No.
that. They are not enjoying that. And so a
No.
couple of times we didn't think to get ahead of it, but we're sitting at the table and afterwards, the 10-year-old's like, "Well, that was kind of scary actually." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like how did
Yeah.
that happen?" And
Yeah.
as a parent or even just as a member of the family, you do not want to let these things run amok and create so much discord and tension. So it's gonna be a little awkward probably to set. I know in a lot of families, there's not a lot of clarity like that. Things are not
Exactly.
spoken that clearly. Things are swept under rugs this way and that. Things are whispered about,
Mhm.
or there's like a group text that one person isn't on. So in all these situations, that's not doing anything to help. And everyone is bearing this stress. Actually could take a step there. So I think that's a good place to know maybe you need a boundary if you're carrying
Absolutely.
stress, if there's tension, if there's other conversations going on behind the
Yeah.
scenes.
No, and I think it is, and I think it's even more significant, not just the politics stuff now, but there's just
Mm,
since COVID, there's been just a lot of unrest in a lot of ways, and
mhm.
people have a lot of different opinions that they may have had before, or maybe it was stimulated by this, but they're more vocal about them a lot of
Mhm.
times. And so, how do we handle those things? How do we
Mhm.
honor someone? And certainly, we
Mhm.
all have the right to think, believe, but there also comes when they're trying to push that on us or bring
Yeah.
that into our life, and that's where the boundaries come.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because I think that's a good way to know. Like, you don't have to line up on everything, but
Right,
in these certain situations, that's not the appropriate time to be, talking about that all the time. It's not that
right,
you could have your opinion, you can share your opinion,
sure,
but that can't be the only thing you ever talk about.
right, and maybe. you do want to set a time that you just go to lunch with that person and you guys
Mhm.
just talk it out on some
Yeah.
stuff. Listen to them well and tell them what you
Mhm.
think. And sure, but a 10-year-old birthday dinner is not where that happens, or
Mhm.
other or Christmas Eve dinner or
Mhm.
Thanksgiving. That's just, you put some things off the table there. I mean, there's so many families I've talked to that every Thanksgiving they get in a fight.
Mm. Mhm.
And because there's different opinions and they all know it and they all kind of bow ahead of time, but nobody, as we talked in the last episode, pre-decides not to
Mhm.
go there. And so all of a sudden, there's another Thanksgiving with three people leaving mad and,
Mm.
turkey legs on the floor that they threw at each other. And
Gosh.
yeah, can't wait till next Thanksgiving.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a great pattern.
No, no, no.
Okay. All right. So if a couple does decide to set boundaries, how can they do this well? You gave us some good steps already, but what else do we need to know to be able to set the boundary really well
Yeah.
and lovingly?
I think a couple things. One, prayer.
Mhm.
And really thinking it through, like we talked about, making sure you're being fair in what you're doing. You're not
Mhm.
punishing them, and I think that can get in the way because it angers you. And so, well, we'll set this boundary. You cross that, and you don't see your grandkids for 40 years.
Mhm.
Because you're mad, and so you're punishing them for that. The
Mm.
boundaries are not punishment.
Mhm.
Boundaries are to make relationships healthier. And so I think as you then have a boundary to set, I think you talk about it together, you agree on the boundary. I think you both go to talk usually to the in-laws about it, but the one who is that person's son or daughter is the one I think works better to to present that. And
Mhm.
I don't think that as a man that's advocating your leadership role. I think it's being a student of your in-laws and knowing
Mhm.
I can preach all day and they're not going to hear word I say. They're going to
Mhm.
listen to her.
Mhm.
So I'm going to be there with her. I'm going to support her. I'm going to protect her if I need to in this situation.
Mhm.
But we feel like they're going to hear it better from her than they do from me. I think
Mhm.
all that's good.
Mhm.
And then just be real consistent with it. You can't set a boundary and not follow through with it. And you need to set it what the consequences are. You come to Christmas Eve drunk, you don't get to come in.
Mhm.
You start at the dinner table, you start a political argument, we're going to ask you to leave. And, I mean, just kind of let know what the consequences are. And then
Mhm.
you got to follow through because if you don't and you don't ask them to leave, they'll think, what was that boundary?
Mhm.
They didn't ask me to leave. I'm going to get some more ammunition for the next dinner because I've got some
Mhm.
great arguments to go against Uncle
Mm.
Bob over here.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I think that's good. That's not punitive. That's a really important point. And I think that starting with prayer helps you not to start just like with anger, like
Yes.
retaliating. So that's a great starting point. Do you have any examples? Other you've given us a good. Do you have any other examples where couples have done this well?
I had a couple, and it's still my favorite story. It happened a long number of years ago. But this couple, I had done the premarital counseling, done their marriage, and they knew that Christmas was going to be a problem because they did have it where there were very set traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I advised them that fall to kind of start talking about it. And so they talked to his parents, talked to her parents. Nobody would budge. I mean, it was like,
Mm.
no, this is our tradition. This is what we're doing. So that when it came to Christmas, nobody had budged. They'd just been married not quite a year. Um, they left town. They went to
Mm.
Kansas City, Missouri for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
When they brought it up again next year, guess what? Everybody was willing to compromise and move. And so, and for them, it was like, it wasn't bad having our first Christmas together, just the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
And they felt like we just can't have this happen. We can't go through this every year because it was tough. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they were getting phone calls and
Oh,
manipulation and all this kind of stuff. And, the thing I kind of said earlier, it might be grandma's last Christmas.
right.
You
Right.
can't do that. She would just die. No,
Oh,
probably not. She's probably more
yeah.
flexible than you are,
Right.
really. So I think that was it. I think the thing we talked about, I had situations where the dad and usually it's the dad giving the daughter money. And
Mm-hmm.
I think what that does, it emasculates, I think, in a way, the husband, like, you really can't provide well for my daughter, so I'm going to supplement you. And so just cutting that off, I think was a very important thing to do. We're gonna,
Mhm.
and the daughter's the one, he went with her, but the daughter told her dad, "I love you. I appreciate everything you've done, but we can't do that anymore. We're gonna make it on
Mhm.
our own,
Mhm.
and we want your love and care and support, but we don't want your money anymore."
Mhm.
And so, and then just
Yeah.
other things I think where, I think sometimes they do expect a couple just to fall right in, like a Sunday dinners or something. We always do this
Right.
kind of stuff. And being able to say, we love coming, it's fun, but we're not going to come every Sunday. We're
Mhm.
going to come every other Sunday or come one Sunday a month, whatever it works out best. And those
Mhm.
are tough sometimes, but it allows you to establish your own identity as a couple, to
Mhm.
give that separation from family of origin and for them beginning to see you have your own life. And that may be hard for them in some ways, but that's what marriage is. It's
Yeah.
like you said, it's leaving, it's cleaving, it's building your own family. And
Mhm.
that's the most important thing
Mhm.
for sure.
Yeah, that's good. A couple other ones I've seen. It's just funny because it's like I've seen these recurring many
Yeah.
times, but where the couple has to ask the in-laws to please call or text or ask before you come to our house. Don't just show up, you know. And that's surprisingly common. Very surprising. I guess surprising to me. My parents still live in town, but I don't know how that is. But um yeah, surprising amount of in-laws who were just show up at that door and
Yeah.
expect to be, not interrupting anything whatsoever. Another is expecting to have free access to the grandchildren to do whatever, whenever. So, oh, I want to take them to this, I want to take them to do that, and not really running that by the
Ask,
the parents. Yeah.
asking the kids a lot of times before you ask the parents,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
because
no,
then,
no.
yeah, well,
I have seen that and it was not good.
oh, it's not good. And it's not,
Not
what are you
good.
teaching the kid?
Yes. Well, and then somebody is going to end up disappointed, and I hope it's not the child because they're going to hold it over your head, whichever
Exactly.
person disappointed them. Yeah, it's terrible. Um, and yeah, so those are a few things where it's like th- those are very, very okay boundaries to set. It's very normal
Absolutely.
and very acceptable to say, hey, if you have an idea with the kids, I love when you hang out with them, but I need you to ask me first, just run it by me. I would not like to see them disappointed like that again. So I need you to check with me first. I need to know that we're not busy that day. I need to know that we have the ability,
Exactly.
whatever thing it is. Um, and so just setting that, and I'm not sure how to enforce that one. How would you enforce that?
Well, it's
Mm.
I think you ask first, like you were
Mhm.
saying, and then if they do it again, I think you, maybe one of the ways is you say no
Mhm.
until they get it. Now your kid's
Mhm.
a variable in there,
Yeah.
but hopefully because the grandparents love the kid, and you were not saying you can't see them. You're saying let's just
Right.
plan a little bit. You can may
Yeah.
still see them 3 times a week if you want,
Mhm.
but let's plan around what we're doing. And I
Yeah.
think that, and I think the drop-in thing, I've seen that happen too. Granddad drops by, the kids are there. Hey, I'm going to take them to wherever. And,
Mhm.
didn't ask you,
Right.
kids are already in his car,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and what are you going to do in that situation? So,
Yeah.
yeah, you mentioned the person that the dad bought them their first house.
Mhm.
Well, in this situation, the dad kept the key.
Oh,
And
yeah. Yeah.
it's really, yeah, it's really my house, and that's why I have a key, and I'll come
Mhm.
in whenever I want to. No, maybe not saying that, but
Mhm.
doing that.
But it happened. Yeah.
So the last time it happened, the kids had spent the night out. Husband and wife are in bed on a Saturday
Mm.
morning, enjoying each other. Guess who comes in?
Oh, no.
Dad. That's when they got the key back. And
Yeah.
the husband said, "We're either getting his key or we're selling this thing or giving it to
Mhm.
him and getting out. We can't do this."
Yeah. That's
So
uncomfortable.
so maybe that makes some people feel better that, well, they didn't cross that boundary.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
it's like,
Gosh.
wow, that was about the worst.
Oh, that's a rude awakening right there.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think those are good because I think sometimes if you're not sure if it's okay to go ahead and set that boundary, there's going to be a moment like that you get to where you're like, okay, we could have set the boundary, a couple incidents back.
absolutely. And sometimes, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just helping us
Yeah.
get to that point and how to do it.
Yeah.
especially if you're early in your marriage, or if you maybe you're later in marriage and you just let things go so long,
Mhm.
which that's harder too. That's why it's always better to nip things in the bud. The
Yeah.
quicker an issue develops that you guys need to address together, the sooner you do it, the better.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think it's also, you have to keep an eye on it because things will change with different seasons. Like
Yes.
you're saying, like some of these things would never pop up until there's kids in the mix or until somebody moves, something changes, and suddenly you got to deal with it.
Yeah,
And
I was just thinking, you and I've talked, and we talked, I think, in a team meeting about, I think you're the only one on the team with teenagers, and, and that is different. And so there may become a time, maybe when they're in some of those tough teenage years
oh,
that I'm putting dad, hey, dad, I'm putting him on the line, get
right.
up, so, uh, but then you made
Yeah,
that decision. Yeah.
right.
I need a break, just a little break.
I may have done that a little bit before.
Yes. Yeah.
Because he's already been through it. He survived.
Yeah, and I think most grandparents are gonna jump and sometimes that really is a way to help each other out.
Yeah.
Calling your parents and say, "Hey, we need some alone time. Can you pick the kids up?"
Absolutely. Yeah,
Nothing wrong with that at
absolutely.
all.
Yeah,
Nothing wrong
yeah.
with that.
That's a great. And then also, let them know ahead of time if don't just don't assume. It goes both ways.
That's right.
But I think clear communication is always a win. So,
Always helps.
when spouses are coming from different backgrounds, what are some practical steps they can take to have a better relationship with their in-laws?
I think not writing them off. I think
Mm,
really pre-deciding that these are my in-laws and I want to love them as best I can.
mhm,
So I think taking time to really try to understand them, maybe as you understand a little more of what their family of origin was like,
mhm,
it helps you understand why they're doing some things. Now
mhm,
you may not like them, but it helps you understand what's
mhm,
their background, what is a cultural difference. Sometimes that happens. And
mhm,
if you marry someone in a different culture, there's going to be some adjustments,
mhm,
some things that they may do very different than what you've done. So taking time to do that, but just because they're different doesn't mean that they are wrong. So I think
mhm,
trying to understand them, spending time with them, and then are there some enjoyable things you can do together to enjoy?
mhm,
Maybe the husband and the father-in-law both like cars, so car shows on. Call your father-in-law and say, "Let's go hang out, have
mhm.
some coffee, and go look at these cars." Just looking for ways to connect and get to
Yeah.
know them better and build that relationship. I think you want to make that effort. And
Mhm,
then if you still need to set boundaries, fine. But I think the more we understand people, maybe we're able to do some things without even having to set a boundary because
mhm,
you just the way you do things with them and all that kind of thing.
mhm,
And I think too, if you're the couple, whenever your parents, the in-laws honor a boundary you've done, lavish them with praise.
mm, mhm,
Reinforce that how much that meant to you, how
mhm.
grateful you are that they heard you and did that.
Oh, yeah, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah.
That's a good precedent to set too. I think a couple other things I can think of is with like family gatherings, holidays and stuff are tough because there's usually a lot of planning, a lot of different opinions. So one thing that I find helpful sometimes is to kind of approach each person who's part of the planning or who has a stake in getting things together and say, what are the most important things you want to see in this holiday? Like, what
Mm,
are your top two or three things that would make this exactly what you hope for? And you know, I'll do that with myself first and say, what am I really looking for here? It's I want to have enjoyable time with my family. What's going to facilitate that? And I don't want to be stressed. And what's going to facilitate that? And so kind of go to each person and maybe not every single person, depending how many people, but kind of the cooks in the kitchen, if you will, like the people who are going
yeah,
to make it happen and define that, get on the same page. And what's it going to take for us to work together to make this thing that you're really dreaming of happen?
that's
And
good.
um, so there's that, but then there's also, I think, taking a step back and thinking about
Mm,
things like in a little bit bigger perspective is always helpful. I will always advocate for that. But in this situation, I think there's a lot of times when, I've heard these in law horror stories of like, oh, they wanted to dress my children in these dumb outfits or whatever. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's annoying, but like, is that really how
right.
big of a deal is this? If grandma buys everyone a matching dumb suit, like, is it let her have it? Let her have, if maybe there's some
Yeah,
other thing going on there, but just all these little things that can seem huge are probably not huge.
yeah.
And
That's
sometimes
really
it's
good.
just a little grace there.
Yeah, I think sometimes we get too in the habit of taking offense at things with a
Mm.
person, and
Mhm.
so everything they do bugs us.
Mhm.
But I think that's right. Look at the big picture.
Yeah.
If every time grandma's got them, she takes them for ice cream, it is that really something you want to fight? Maybe it
Right.
is. If you got a diabetic kid, obviously it is.
Right.
But there's other things that just go and just kind of embrace and be thankful that you've got someone that cares, someone
Mm.
else that cares for your kids. So I think
Yeah.
changing your perspective,
Mhm.
because I think some grandparents probably take some liberties they shouldn't.
Yeah.
And it depends. Is it really disrupting your family? Is it disrupting what you're trying to do with your kids? Or
Mhm.
is it just that, yeah, they bug me? And if it's just, yeah, they
Mhm.
bug me, probably just try to reframe your perspective on it.
Mhm. Yeah, we had he's passed away now, but my grandpa, he was 90 or 91, but we had the opportunity to spend more time with him in these last couple years, and he just always wanted to take the kids for ice cream. And our kids were
Yeah,
a little smaller at the time, and I'm like, they can't keep eating ice cream. But then you realize this is a chance they're not going to get back again, you know?
absolutely.
And so it was one of those things where I had to let it go, but ultimately they remember that. They loved it. It was
That's
really
what I was gonna
special.
ask you. I bet that was one of the things they remember about him.
Oh, they had so much fun with them. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It was great.
which is cool, and you just don't wanna rob your kids of that.
No. No, because that was I mean, it was unexpected that they would even get that much time, and so
I
how dumb of an argument, just to say they can't have that much sugar.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a family a couple of weeks ago, and the wife was having a lot of trouble with her in-laws, um, and and she just decided to, reframe the way she looked at them,
Mhm.
and to see them as a blessing instead of these people that, "Gosh, that woman grates on me,"
Mhm.
or, "Yeah, he's so opinionated," because the kids don't see him that way.
Mhm.
And I think, and that's what this lady said, as much as it bugs me, my kids adore them,
Mhm.
and they are great grandparents. And I
Mhm.
know, yes, I'm there and I may have set a boundary, but a lot of times I got to get out of the way because it's
Mhm.
me, not them.
Yeah.
And I think being willing to look at yourself that way too. I
Mhm.
loved your example of the granddad and kids. I mean,
Mhm.
it just is great.
Mhm.
And yeah, you wouldn't give them ice cream like that.
No. That's why it was so fun.
But it was it. Yeah, exactly. I think maybe sometimes as grandparents, we look for the things that parents won't let them know.
I
Like,
have that on record, Dr.
yeah, I
King. It's
know.
recorded.
Yeah.
We've us parents have been suspecting that for a while.
Yes.
Um, no, I think that's good. I think it's good to step back and say, like, it's probably going to be okay, whatever it is. If it's not,
Right.
then you got to address it. But if it's
Absolutely.
going to be okay,
Yeah, it's not taking them to buy drugs. They're not
yeah,
taking them to,
right,
you're 10, it's time you learned how to drink
right.
scotch, buddy.
Oh no,
No, it's
probably
not
somebody
those.
out there. Don't do that.
No, and yeah,
Oh my, yeah,
I've seen those things happen.
yep,
And
yeah,
so, yeah, those are things, yes, you say,
yeah.
sorry, that's one experience you're not going to have the memory of with granddad.
Right. And that I mean, that's a true in-law nightmare. And, we're not talking about like, "Oh, I let the baby stay up for 30 minutes late." We're talking about something
So,
actually dangerous. That's a different situation.
yeah, our kids trust us to do things with the kids and have fun with them. We're not going to do anything harmful, but I would never take advantage of that. I would never try
Mhm.
to do something with them that I know their parents wouldn't want them doing.
Mhm. Yeah, that's important.
That does not include ice cream.
Yeah. I think that's
Right?
fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important, and I think that's a great thing to work toward too, is that kind of openness and trust.
Yeah. I think, you know, what I want people to see out of this is that you're probably going to have problems with your in-laws. There's going to be
Mhm.
things they do that buck you, but don't write them off.
Mhm.
With God's help, and I think this is a great prayer, and God has honored this with some other people in my life where I just pray, God, I do not like being around this person.
Mhm.
Help me see their heart, help me see them through your eyes. And he does. I mean, he ended up making me like that sounds bad. He made me like this guy that I could not stand, but I had to be on a board with him, and so I just started praying that, and all of a sudden, I didn't he wasn't bugging me
Wow.
like he used to,
Mhm.
and so I think you want that too.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And I think one thing that helps kind of frame that perspective for me is at some point I don't know when it clicked in, but I realized like we're going to be together for a long time.
Yeah.
Probably like hopefully like I hope
Yeah.
that we all
They
have a
live
long life. Yeah.
yeah.
And so realizing like I got married at 21. Like that gives us a lot of years ideally to be adults together. I was looking at my parents with their in-laws, their sibling in-laws and how many years they got and just really great quality relationships that will just continue for a long time. So you have to make decisions knowing like if you could potentially be in my life for a lot of years, I want to make decisions that help that process.
Yes. Absolutely. And just being intentional about that, making that a
Mhm.
priority.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, Dr. Kim, this has been a helpful conversation. Of course, feel free to write us if you've got some situations that we did not touch on. I'm sure there are all kinds of experiences out there, and we know this advice is not one size fits all. There's all kinds of
Right.
scenarios, but I think a lot of the principles that we've talked about today can help in a lot of situations. And as we always say about everything, start with prayer.
Mhm.
But Dr. Kim, to close out the conversation, is there any final piece of advice you have for us today?
Well, if you were wondering if you're the only one that has in-law issues, now you know you're not.
Yeah.
And I guess what I would want is to know is to look at that, express, pray, get together on the same page as a couple, but and then present the boundary. But in the big picture, how do we make these relationships as healthy as they can be? And there
Mhm.
may be some limits. I get that. But from your perspective as a couple, how do we make our relationship with our in-laws as healthy as they can be?
Mhm.
I think that's what God would want us to do. And I know there's some people are right and are saying it'll never be healthy, and I get that
Mhm.
because maybe there's drugs, well, all kinds of
Mhm.
things could be in there. But if that is possible, do everything you can to make that happen.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great word.
So,
Well, make sure that you guys are following us everywhere we are, all over socials, because we have just continual little tidbits of advice and help. And that's also a great way to DM us, let us know your questions, let us know what we didn't cover today that you need to have an answer to. We're always available there on Facebook, Instagram, and of course, Dr. Kim's on TikTok doing the challenges. And we have lots of fun stuff over there too. So make sure that you're following us. And then next week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about a throwaway marriage, what it is, how to avoid it. So don't miss that one.
hey, and also, if you've enjoyed today's episode, would you just take a minute to leave us a rating and review? Leaving it on iTunes, leaving your review there is one of the best ways that to make the show more visible to other couples, other people who haven't seen it yet. I know we all assume sometimes that everybody knows about it, but they don't, and we would love
Mhm.
for them to do. There's a lot of marriage content out there, and we're passionate about helping people have God's plan for marriage, and that's really the core of what we want to do in this podcast. So you can help us make that happen by bringing more people to us. You can find the link in our show notes. You can to the review page, and we really appreciate your help. Just thanking you in advance for taking just the minute or two to do that. We appreciate it.
Yeah. And we do appreciate you sharing your time with us today and listening, tuning in. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.